All right, we will go ahead and get this show on the road. So, as you all have seen by now, I've graded your discussion board posts, and I'm very pleased with what the class did. Good job, everyone. I'm starting to make more comments on your work going forward. So if you haven't already, please go back and look at the comments that I left on your discussion board post. There may be something that I think you need to elaborate on, something that you're not quite understanding at this point. So please go back and look at that and see if either of those apply to you. And then if you have questions, email me. I would love to talk to you about those. I am currently grading your invention activities. I told myself that I was going to have them done last night, but that obviously did not happen. I am reading them very thoroughly and trying to leave several comments on each page for students. So I hope that that will serve everyone well going forward, because our paper is due next Friday, I believe. So reading my comments now and understanding where your strengths are or where potential weaknesses may lie will be very important going forward. So you can expect to see a lot more comments from me on your work now, and I will be a little bit nitpickier, but that's all for personal growth and constructive criticism. So I'm excited. You all should be excited too. So that being said, do we have any questions about the assignments from last week at all? Any general questions about our week ahead? Anything?
Does every writing have all the ethos, logos, and pathos? Or yeah, pathos?
All the major papers?
Yeah, like, well, just
they'll all employ some aspect of ethos, pathos, and logos.
okay.
Your first paper is going to be a description of their effectiveness. So I'll probably post the paper that I wrote about it for you guys to use as an example. But in that paper, I used the David Doss, A Math Problem for Pi Day article, and I went through and described the rhetorical appeals, where they exist, and whether or not they're effective for the intended audience. So that's what the first paper will be like. Very, very ethos, pathos, logos centered. The next paper that you guys will write is one where you respond to an argument. So being able to address strengths or potentially weaknesses in another piece's ethos, pathos, and logos will be important too, but it's not going to be the same description that we're doing right now. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well, just filling out the invention activity form, it was hard for me.
Yeah, it's
because it's like I'm really stretching for some of the things.
There are some that depending on the article that you chose, you may not have a great and succinct answer for each of the questions, and that's understandable. So that's part of the reason that we used articles that I have read several times, so I know them very well. And if I understand why maybe this response that you wrote isn't very strong, I'm not going to count points off on that, because that may just be that the question that I'm asking you isn't pertaining to the article that you read, which is fair. But that invention activity just wanted you to think a lot about the appeals and try to apply them to the article. So it was a bit of, yes, it was at some point monotonous and long. But my goal with that is that you stick with the same article for your paper. So now you have a lot of points, evidence, and things to work with for your paper. So what may be kind of monotonous and tedious now, hopefully should help you for that paper, is my goal.
Okay, great.
So, awesome. Any other questions right now? All right. So, as you read in the reading last week, the section focused on evaluating the argument. And as I said, this is where the investigation into ethos, pathos, and logos is important. So something that I want to emphasize today, and we'll get to this in an activity later, is identifying target audience. In some of the invention activities I read, intended audience was a little too broad. So I want us to think about ways that we can narrow down target audience from general audience. So I gave you guys some articles that were written by major newspapers. So yes, any reader of the New York Times is technically part of the audience for a math problem for Pi Day. But is that who the author is trying to convince of his argument? That's where the difference between intended audience and general audience lies. So there's a distinction to be made between those two. And making a good distinction between the intended and the general is what's going to strengthen your paper. Because when you evaluate the rhetorical appeals, you want to make sure that you are curtailing those rhetorical appeals to the audience. So when you're talking about how they're effective or not, you want to refer that to the audience instead of the general populace, because it's very hard to make claims about the general populace. Those claims can be very easy to disprove. So yeah, good words of caution from the invention activity so far. Don't be super general, but also don't write in absolutes. So don't in any of these papers write things like, all people think this, the audience believes this absolutely, because all I have to do is find one example of someone who doesn't fit that claim that you're making, and I've disproven your argument. So when you say things like that, you want to say that the audience may feel this. You want to say that within the population of readers of the article, who is going to feel that way, because then you narrow down what I can use to disprove your argument. Does that make sense? It's an entire section on my LSAT. It's great, but it's very important. All right, so, invention activity. So Heather brings up some good concerns about the invention activity, and I wanted to take some time to discuss that with you guys. I've already disclaimed that it was supposed to be a bit of monotonous work that wanted you to make stretches in your thought process to see where your evidence may lie, but does anyone else want to talk about the invention activity? What might have been difficult in it? What was actually kind of easy, if anything? Any other thoughts about that? All right, so we are going to move into some ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos practice. Yes, I'm wanting to hit you guys over the head with this a lot because, as I've been saying all the time, it's very important, but we're also going to pay particular attention to target audience, because that's where I saw a bit of weakness in the invention activities in the class as a whole. So
tell me again the difference between target audience and intended audience.
Target and intended are changeable or interchangeable.
Oh, okay, all right.
Oh, I'm wanting to draw the distinction between who can read the article, you know, anyone who can read has access to the New York Times, so on and so forth, and the people who the argument is trying to convince of.
Okay.
So Heather, I think you read the math problem for Pi Day article in your invention activity. Yep. So yes, the general audience is anyone who reads that article, anyone who read the New York Times. But the intended audience is who Devadas is trying to convince of his argument.
Okay.
Because you're going to have people like me who are master's students in English who go, yeah, the humanities are great and we deserve more respect. So I'm not the intended audience because he's just preaching to the choir with me. his intended audience are the people who may be resistant or skeptical of his argument. So, as you noted, people who are affiliated with the STEM field, people who have these preconceived notions against the humanities. So that is exactly what I mean when I say intended audience. Does that clear up your confusion? Excellent. So let's look at some things now. Oh, it's not coming up. Why isn't it coming up? All right, gotta blow this up a little bit. Oh man, the quality of that is fantastic. Okay, that's about as big as I can make it without it getting too ridiculous. It looked a lot better when I downloaded it. So this is an ad by Warner's. It's an older clothing company. I don't think that they're around anymore. And they put out this advert for their like sculpting wear. So like, it's like a modern, or it's an older version of Spanx. So we've got a pair here that says, "This is no shape for a girl." Who is the intended audience of this advertisement?
Women who feel their hips are too big?
Yeah, that's absolutely could be an intended audience. So maybe we need to go general and then narrow it down. So who is the general audience for this?
Women.
I would say anyone who picks up this newspaper, anyone who has the ability to see the advertisement is the general audience. And then if we think about who the advertisement is trying to convince, in this case, to buy the retro Spanx, Heather started us off well. Women who may have some insecurities about how big their thighs are and are looking to sculpt themselves. Who else could this be for? I'm thinking a certain 48% of the current population. So there is part of this advertisement that is geared towards men, and you can't read the text below. I mean, yeah, you can't really read the text in general. But this advertisement was produced in a time where a lot of men controlled the household money and would be the ones to purchase these items. So the very small text next to the woman posing in their product, it talks about how men want to make sure that their women don't look like the pair, that they look more like the woman in the picture. So right there, you've got the intended audience of any man who has some disposable income who may want his wife to look a little different. But as Heather pointed out, if we think about this advertisement in a more modern sense, any woman who wants to wear this product would certainly be intended in the audience as well. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. We'll go on to another one. Hopefully it'll be a little bit easier. All right. Don't treat diabetes to your heart. Who wants to take a swing at this one? Julia, who do you think the intended audience for this is?
Maybe people who have like diabetes or heart problems.
Yeah. So what could the advertisement be saying to those people?
Maybe like watch what you eat or something.
Yeah, exactly. These people who already have diabetes or heart concerns, they're in a higher risk category for developing complications if they don't watch what they eat. So this advertisement pretty clearly shows what may happen to your heart if you continue poor eating habits. Is there another potential audience, maybe a secondary audience to what Julia said? Tony, what do you think? Who else could be included in this besides people who already have diabetes?
Probably the people who treats usually associated with a good thing, but this is kind of trying to point towards that it treats you with diabetes and diseases. So.
Yeah. What makes you think that?
Because like when I think of a treat, I want it and it sounds good, but when you look at the effects of these treats, it tends to actually damage people, and so it's trying to get more knowledge for that aspect of it.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. Is it that, did something in the text cue you into that reading of the image?
Well, first of all, ice cream, of course, and like treats highlighted in the don't treat diabetes. And so that's what I kind of noticed. And so, yeah.
Exactly. So first we get the juxtaposition of the two meanings of the word treat. The gratification for accomplishing something good, hashtag treat yourself, or treating your body in a poor manner by consuming a lot of ice cream. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Excellent job, Tony. And I think that could wrap up intended audience for this image.
So when you say intended audience, it can be the first or the secondary audience?
Yeah, so when you're reading an article and evaluating an image, you want to scrutinize who the most impacted population of the society, of the readership is. So I think in this case, Julia and Tony both make very compelling arguments for audience. So there may not necessarily be a primary and a secondary audience.
Okay.
There may just be people who are at risk of diabetes, maybe in a way to generalize that. People who may already have it, or people who may develop it if they keep treating themselves to horrible treats. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in an article like the Devadas, there is a more accurate way to describe the intended audience, i.e. people who like favor STEM fields, people who think that they're more difficult than the humanities. But then a secondary audience could be people who are on the fence and need or would be convinced one way or another. But those aren't the people that Devadas is trying to convince, is it? And we can tell that through his language, right? So that's what cues you into a more defined intended audience.
Okay.
So while we're here, let's practice some ethos, pathos, and logos. So what rhetorical appeal jumps out the most in this image, do you think?
I would say pathos.
Yeah, why do you think that?
Because like the image especially would probably be trying to maybe scare the audience into like rethinking their eating decisions.
Yeah. Can you be explicit on how the image does that?
with I mean, the ice cream cone as a treat, but also showing what the ice cream could do to you if you eat way too much of it.
Exactly. So I absolutely agree with you. Pathos is the dominant rhetorical appeal in this image. And as you were saying, through the similarities of the heart and the ice cream, it's trying to scare people into not eating so poorly. And you're right. The deteriorating image of the heart is a little bit frightening. I don't know about anyone else, but I'm like hyper aware of my heartbeat right now. So yeah, it is a very strong appeal to pathos. Does anyone else see any other appeals that may be present? I don't know how well you guys can read the article or the image, but right here it says people with diabetes are 2 to 4 times more likely to get heart disease. What rhetorical appeal does that support? Chandler, what rhetorical appeal is supported by statistics and data?
Isn't it supposed to be logos?
Exactly. Exactly. So as we've discussed, logos isn't purely statistics and data, but it's supported by it. So when you see data and statistics, you think there is a logos argument here, and this statistic is highlighting it. So excellent job. Up here, it says Dr. Riddy, so maybe that's an appeal to ethos if this is from a doctor's office, but I'm not sure how well you guys can see that. So if I had downloaded good quality images from the internet, we would not have that issue. So I am sorry for my lapse. All right. So I've got one more for you. Let's see what you make of it. Resume. Okay, not resuming. What the heck? There it is. Heather, you got a quizzical look on your face. What's sticking out at you?
Well, I was trying to figure out what was coming out of the cigarette.
No, it's a little.
I read "Smoking Kills" and I'm like, is it because it's a poor image, or I think I figured it out, but it's like, so that's just.
It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it? But it tries to get you to think about it, doesn't it? And that's what I was going for. So Heather, what do you think is inside that cigarette?
Bullets.
I think so too. They're kind of grainy, even though this is like surprisingly the best image that I found quality wise.
I know, I can read the little writing, but I couldn't see.
You know, look at me. 1 out of 3, guys. Woohoo. All right, so intended audience. Kayla, who do you think the intended audience for this is?
I think it would probably be people who smoke.
Exactly. Why do you think that?
Because it's kind of trying to get a message across of saying, hey, if you smoke, it's going to kill you, or it could kill you.
No, it's saying that it's going to kill you pretty much. So this ad is being pretty straightforward and not sugarcoating anything. You know, so I absolutely agree with you. And like Heather said, those are some bullets in that cigarette right there. So if you smoke, you will die. Kind of reminds me of that Mean Girls scene. Don't have sex. You will get an STD and you will die. Anyway, yes, it's very blunt, isn't it? So can anyone think of a secondary audience? This may be a little bit more implicit, but I want you to focus on what's inside the cigarette and think about who that may appeal to and who that might convince that they need to be against smoking. Or let me put it this way. if we equate smoking to bullets, what group of people may pay closer attention to this argument?
Maybe veterans?
That could be one. Absolutely.
People in the NRA.
That could certainly, maybe not in the NRA, but you're getting close. Do you think you can modify that statement at all?
People
Because
who
if,
own guns.
well, if people who own guns, they're probably not going to be afraid of bullets, are they? Maybe being shot at by bullets, yes, as anyone would. But the sight of bullets isn't going to be as shocking to them. But who might that be shocking to or bothersome for?
People not in the NRA.
Exactly. So what I was wanting to see if you would get to is people who are in support of stricter gun regulations, stricter, a more narrow definition of the Second Amendment. So someone who sees this image and understands that there are bullets inside of that cigarette, well, if they're going to equate the deaths of smoking to the deaths caused by gun violence, these people who would normally just be proponents of stricter gun laws are probably going to look at this image and think, if smoking kills just as many people, according to this argument, as guns do, maybe this is something that I should adopt in addition to my policy on stricter gun laws. Does that make sense? So you see, Heather, how this one has a bit more of a primary and secondary audience? Exactly. So people who want stricter gun laws, they're not the target audience. As Kayla said, it's the smokers. But this is someone else who might be easily moved by this image. So if they're easily moved by the image, what rhetorical appeal would be working on them to make them agree with this argument? Who am I gonna call on now? Julia, what you got?
Would it also be pathos for this one?
Exactly. Why is that?
Is that because if you think guns are gonna kill people, then like the smoking would do the same thing.
Exactly. So for the secondary audience, that's exactly an appeal to pathos. Chandler, if we're thinking about the primary intended audience, smokers, how would pathos affect them in this image?
It would affect them that if it was smokers that are trying to quit or on the verge of wanting to quit, but can't get over that final hump.
Exactly. So how could this image help them get over that final hump?
They gotta view it as a if they smoke, that they just have a gun to their head, basically, that they're just.
That is kind of what the image is implying, isn't it? You know, you hold your cigarette here. Well, I guess the bullets are kind of facing the wrong way. If they were on the filter part and you're holding the filter up to your face, you know, you might as well just be holding those bullets to your face, shouldn't you?
Yeah.
If this image, they had a chance, they failed. So how do you think a smoker might react to thinking about holding a bullet to their face like that in terms of pathos?
It could be like an epiphany to them, to where they finally flash back through their eyes of their family, their life they have right now.
Exactly. It can be kind of scary, can't it?
Yeah.
To think about this deadly weapon the argument is making that you have in between your fingers and hold up to your face all the time. So exactly, this is a scare tactic. And as Kayla identified, smoking kills. It's being blunt. Continue smoking and you're gonna die. All right. So does anyone have any last questions or concerns about ethos, pathos, and logos for this session? Give you a couple of seconds to decide. Yeah, as I said, we keep doing this, but it's very important. So I hope that you continue to think about it as you're presented with arguments, and especially in the articles that you chose with the lovely invention activity that I made you do. All right, so we'll move on and discuss some things that we will be going over this week. So I know that your reading hasn't been assigned yet, or you're not supposed to have it done yet, is not my expectation, but I will briefly touch on the major points so that you know what to expect in the week ahead, and that should make the assignments for the week a little bit easier as well. So your first assignment for the week is going to be about working claims, which is what the book calls it, and I will probably keep calling it your thesis statement just because that's how I've been trained, and I can't get working claim to stick in my head for that. So working claim and thesis are the same thing if I confuse the two. So the textbook spends time talking to you guys about the differences between dull, weak thesis statements, working claims, and strong ones. So please pay close attention to that as your discussion board. I think it's for tonight. It might be for Wednesday. I'll check and I will announce it per my weekly announcement. It's going to ask you to write a working claim for your paper. So this is going to be a great assignment in terms of prepping you for your paper, because this is going to be your main argument. This will be an opportunity for your peers to comment on it, offer any places where it could be clear, concise, more concise, and I will also be able to look at them and help steer you on the right track. So we are going to look at weak thesis statements, and then my example of the thesis statement for the paper that I wrote for this argument. So let's see here. Here I've got some examples of, maybe I shouldn't say bad, but these thesis statements, working claims, need some work. They are not fantastic. So David Doss uses ethos, pathos, and logos. Kayla, what do you think is wrong, or what could be strengthened in that claim?
I think you could add more detail to the claim, like say he uses ethos, pathos, and logos, and then explain how he uses them.
Exactly. So can you maybe give a brief example of what you would say to strengthen this claim?
I honestly don't remember the article that much, so
to use your example of explaining why, you could say, David Doss, professor at San Diego University of Mathematics, or professor of mathematics at San Diego University, uses ethos, pathos, and logos, but there I have defined his ethos already. So just like you said, giving some definition to that would strengthen your argument. So let's move on to the second example. David Doss argues that the humanities are more complex than STEM fields. What can we do to make that a little bit stronger? Tony, what do you think?
It says what he does, but not how he does it. So you could say David Doss argues that the humanities are more complex in STEM fields by using a mixture of ethos, pathos, and logos.
Exactly. Perfect. All right. And then, oh, hey, look at that. I didn't finish this one. Chandler, I know that you read this article. So what do you think of this claim? The LA Times claims trophy hunting should be illegal. How can we make that stronger?
You can make it stronger by explaining why I think it should be illegal by saying through the statistics of endangered animal species being population getting lower and lower every year.
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, and then finally, trophy hunting is causing African wildlife to become endangered. Did anyone else read this article? I haven't gotten through all of your invention activities yet. All right, we'll move on to mine and we'll look at a strong argument. Oh, hey, look, it's on 2 pages. All right. So I copy and pasted this straight from my essay. So through his article, David Doss appeals to the STEM community by employing strong ethos and logos to persuade it to understand that the humanities aren't a lesser discipline, but simply a discipline with priorities different than STEM. Heather, what's something that you notice about this thesis statement as opposed to the others?
It's much longer.
It is much longer.
And includes much more detail. You're very specific in the points of that.
Exactly. So even though in my introduction, I introduced the article, for my thesis statement, I reinstate that David Doss wrote this article because it's important to align your claim with the article and where you're getting the argument from. So that is why I have his article and David Doss in a different color to bring your attention to that. What else is something that I do if you focus on where I've changed the colors of the image?
You're talking about who he's appealing to, how he's appealing to them, and why he's appealing to them.
Exactly. So in my thesis statement, I identify what, Allie? You've already said it.
That he's appealing to the STEM community.
Exactly. So that is
ethos and logos so that they understand.
Exactly. So the STEM community is the article's what?
Pathos.
No.
Oh, wait. Audience, target audience.
The intended audience. I identify the intended audience in the thesis statement. So I'm stating who's writing the article, who's making the argument, who he's making it to, and then as you said, he's making his argument through strong examples of ethos and logos. Excellent. So what about that purple bit? What would we call that purple bit? Heather, I know you read this article.
Well, that's his claim.
Exactly.
And you're saying, you know, his article, who he is, the intended audience in the purple down below, but it's what his claim is.
Exactly. Exactly. So are you guys seeing the invention activity all kind of wrapped up into these sentences, or this one sentence actually? The things that the invention activity asked you to identify. That's why, even though it was kind of long and a little bit boring, that's why this is important. You have the ability to identify your target audience for the argument, the author, the medium in which the author is presenting the argument, and what his claim is. And you can wrap all of that up into a thesis statement. So yes, the invention activity is going to help you on your whole paper, but I hope that you guys are able to see how many points from that invention activity are right here. So, does anyone have any questions about how I knew to write this? Because I wrote this without even doing an invention activity. Does anyone have any questions about the thought process behind it, about why I'm looking for the points that I'm looking for?
Oh, tell us.
Well, this is the stuff that's been hammered into me in my 5 years at K-State. I, as a writer, especially the writing that I do a lot of literary criticism. So I am analyzing the argument in literature, broadly speaking. So for me, it's important to identify the work that I'm using, which is what I do in the first section there. Identify what my argument is going to be to make sure that I make sense, and to find a claim in the piece that I'm working with. So this is just something that through years of practice, I'm able to write rather easily, but I acknowledge that not everyone is going to find these as easy to write as I do. So I absolutely want to know if anyone has any questions about how to write a good thesis statement, because this is going to be a very important part of your paper. It's something that any reader is going to scrutinize. They're going to scrutinize it because this is your claim, and they're going to look to see if your evidence, the rest of your paper, lines up with what you're saying here. So yeah, if there are no questions about it, that's totally fine. Your textbook does go into further detail about how poor working claims are poor, what can be done to make them stronger, and it provides you more examples of strong thesis statements. But I thought it would be apt to show you the one that I wrote about the article that many of you have read. All right. So, emphasis on the audience, ethos. So your other assignment for the week will ask you to write more extensively on the ethos of your argument. And you're gonna have to determine whether or not the ethos is even very strong, as in the article from the LA Times about trophy hunting. Chandler, can you tell the class who the author of that article is? For those who haven't read that one.
The author of the article said it was the LA Times editorial staff.
Exactly. So the ethos with that is difficult because you can't investigate the credentials of a single person. You can't figure out, this is about trophy hunting. You can't figure out who may hold a degree in biology or environmental studies. You can't figure out who may be a professor, who may be a conservationist who goes to Africa. You don't know any of that. But that's not to say that the editorial board itself isn't credible. In fact, your textbook would say that an editorial board is very credible because that is the entire newspaper taking responsibility of that article. So you've got a different yet interesting argument for ethos there. It's not as cut and dry as what we've been practicing though. So as we wrap this session up, and you have in the back of your minds tips for the assignments for the week, the one on ethos, the best way to check for ethos is to check the byline of the article. especially since we're reading newspaper articles, there's usually a brief italicized section that tells you who the writer of the article is and what their credentials are. So pay attention to that. Through that, you want to investigate their credentials and their experience. But ethos doesn't have to be limited to what's in the byline, and I think that that will be important for you guys to consider. The use of evidence that the author has is also important. So in my PowerPoint, I talk about how at a biology conference, if I'm up there talking about biology and you realize that what I'm saying doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I don't know a whole lot about biology, then you would understand that my ethos on the argument is not very strong because my use of evidence is pretty horrible because I'm not knowledgeable about the field. So if the author is using good evidence, in the Devadas article, for example, he talks about the abilities of the math and science fields, doesn't he? So that is an example of his ethos in the STEM community. And then with that, look at the language. How does he refer to his target audience? How could the arguer refer to her audience? Is she included in it? Is she talking about it as if they're an other? That depends. And that can add to your ethos as well. So, as I said, those are kind of some tips, things to think about for your assignments of the week. And does anyone have any questions as we finish up this session? All right, I am hoping to have the rest of the invention activities graded either tonight or early tomorrow. And as I said, please take the time to look through my comments. As I said, I'm trying to take the time to write substantial comments for each student. And as always, for anything, if you have questions, concerns, need to talk to me about thesis statements more, or you're still not quite understanding ethos, pathos, logos, please email me because we are getting to putting together the pieces of our papers. So I want to make sure that everything is clear at this point. So yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Have a good day, guys. Absolutely.